In the previous video, we learned how to make an object on the screen that if we clicked on it, exactly, it would quote unquote disappear. And by disappear, of course, we mean that it would be moved to an off-screen location. So we're going to scale this up so it's not just one object each time, but it is an array of objects each time. So to do that, first, instead of just one x and one y variable, we're going to need to make arrays of those objects. So I'm going to say a float, open, close square brackets, x equals new float, and then I'm going to say how many objects I want. So I'm going to do, let's say, 25. You can do any number you want. If they're littler, I'd say even more. A couple hundred, 50. It's totally up to you. I'm going to do the same thing with y. I want the same number of x and y variables because I need one x variable and one y variable per object on the screen. So now you see all of a sudden I've gotten all these errors, these little underlines. The reason is there's no such variable as x and there's no such variable as y anymore. There's only x0 and y0, x1, x2, x3, and x4. So as we discussed in class, I could go through the painful process of doing this 25 times and then 25 more times for all 25 of the y variables, but instead we are going to use a for loop. So we can initialize that random value for each one of them in just 3 lines of code, one for the for loop, one for the all 25 x variables, and one for all 25 y variables. So I'm going to say for to start my loop, int I equals 0. I is less than the number of items that I have. I've got 25. You may have a different number. I plus plus, so it ticks through each and every one of those items in each one of those arrays. And then I'm going to have x, open square bracket, I, close square bracket, random. And I said 50 to 450, again, because the circle has a radius of 50, so all of them are completely on screen. None of them will be halfway off screen. I'm going to do the same thing for y. So now I'm going to have 25 y variables, y0, y1, y2, y3, y4. So each one of those circles is going to have, the first circle I make is going to have coordinates of x0, y0, then x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3. I, of course, is just standing in for all those values, 0 to 25. All right. So now I have these 2 lines here have initialized values for 50 variables, 25 x variables and 25 y variables. I still have some error messages down here. Again, there is no such thing as that plain old x and y anymore. I need a for loop to place all these variables. I'm going to quickly comment out this portion of the code by hitting command / and just put the for loop around here. So it's the same for loop. And again, I can reuse I because I is local to the for loop up here. So my for loop down here has no idea that there's another for loop using that local variable I. So I can reuse I in each and every for loop I do, as long as they're not inside one another. So I've made my for loop here. But I need to add in, again, I want to make 25 different circles, not just one. So I'm going to make one ellipse the first time through at x0, y0, then at x1, y1, x2, y2. And those x1 and y1 are values that are not changing, that are standing in for the random numbers. Those are variables representing the random numbers that were assigned one time to each one of those variables. So now if I play it, I should get 25 circles randomly on the screen. And I've taken out this part that makes them clickable. Close that so I can't click it. Nothing's happening here. They're just circles. Now, I'm going to uncomment this code here by hitting command / again. Again, I'm getting all these errors because there's still no such thing as x and y. This group of conditional statements, you may have done it in one long conditional statement if you didn't want to nest the conditional statement, but anything that has to do with these conditional statements needs to be inside the for loop. The reason it needs to be inside the for loop, now I'm closing this for loop down here. It's a lot of brackets, but we need them. is because anything having to do where we're using these variables, if we're not addressing them individually, like x0, y0, I need to call them in a for loop. If we're addressing all of them, I want this to be checking at all times to see if any of these circles were clicked on. That means if my cursor is inside the parameters of any of these circles, it needs to be inside the for loop. So here, I'm going to change my x's to xi's, my y's to yi's. I don't need to change anything else because the size of my circle has stayed the same. And I'm changing my x down here. So what this means now is if my mouse is between the left edge of any of the circles and the right edge of any of the circles and the left edge of any of the circles and the right edge of any of those circles and the mouse is pressed, the x value of just that one circle for which this is all true will be moved off screen. So now that one has been moved off screen. This one has been moved off screen. If I click, if two are overlapping and I click, they're both going to be moved off screen. There's no way around that. This is why I'd recommend that you pick a smaller size. I picked a big size for these circles just because I built on those other tutorials, but I would recommend picking a smaller size, adjusting the radii size if you're checking to see if your cursor is over them. I would also adjust their location on the screen. So this random value between 50 and 450 means the center of the circle will be no smaller than 50 and no bigger than 450, which is how I can assure they're not sort of halfway off screen. Maybe you don't mind if they're halfway off screen, and that's a choice you can make. I can also scale this up really easily. If I want more circles, I'm going to change the size of my array. If I don't change anything else, of course, and I play it, even though I've initialized 125 x variables and 125 y variables, I'm only still using 25 of each. So I'd want to make sure that I'm also initializing, giving value to all 125, and making circles out of all 125. So now I've got 5 times as many circles. Be sure if you change the values in your for loops, but you don't change the values in the declaration of your arrays, you are going to get an array out of bounds exception error. And that simply means, array out of bounds exception 25, that you only have 25 x variables and you're trying to assign value to 125. So once this I gets to have a value of 25, once it exceeds the items in this array, it's going to give you an error. So if you see that, it probably means that you have an error in your array. Unexpected token means that you've messed up with your brackets, or you've messed up, or you've left off a semicolon. So if I'm getting found one too many open characters without a closed character to match it, that's pretty easy. And remember, use that tool where you can put your cursor next to a bracket, either open or close, and it will show you the corresponding bracket. So if you get to the end and you don't have a bracket that it corresponds with, you're missing one somewhere.